Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from Los Angeles, California. Sorry for the delay today. I had some family stuff that we were doing, and then my neighbors are doing some construction projects, so I had to change locations as well. So hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm outside, but I'm in a little courtyard area of my house, and hopefully it's a little quieter from being in the backyard near the neighbors. So hope you're having a good day. Today on our Critter Chat number 24, we're going to talk about an animal that is very, very often celebrated this time of year with the arrival of spring and looking forward to new life in the new year. And that's a common theme amongst many of the cultures in the Northern Hemisphere as we've waited for winter to end and looking forward to life anew in the springtime. And one of the animals that is the most symbolic in all of that are the rabbits. And we're going to talk about the bigger rabbit group called the Lagomorph order. And so that includes rabbits, hares, and one of my top 5 favorite animals, the pika. So we're going to talk a little bit about all of those animals today. And so I hope you enjoy. Thanks. So the Lagomorphs can be divided, that's an order. If you're looking at the way scientists classify animals, it's kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. So order is the group of called Lagomorphs. So they are a mammal. They're in the mammal class. And then under Lagomorph, there are 2 families called the Leporidae, which is the rabbits and the hares, and the Ochotonidae, which are the pikas. And so we're going to talk a little bit about both of those today. And between those 2 groups, there are actually somewhere between 87 and 93 species of animals that make up this order of Lagomorph. Now, most of those are rabbits and hares. There's about 58 to 62 of them. And there's some pretty good discrepancies because there's a couple that are very endangered that they don't know if they're still with us. There's also some genetic research that needs to be done to really determine how many species are out there. And with the pikas, there's about 30 species of them. And we'll talk more about them in just a moment. So first of all, let's talk about what this group Lagomorph is. Previously, they were classified as part of the rodent group. And then they realized that there were quite a few things that this group could do that was different than the rodents. And so they've been separated out from the rodents for quite a while. But they are a mammal. They're a small to medium-sized mammal. With the smallest ones, adults weighing less than a pound. So some of them are just itty-bitty little guys. And then some of them, especially some of the domestic breeds of rabbits, can be in the 20-pound range. So they can be quite a bit bigger. But we're going to talk a little bit about the differences, the similarities, and we'll go from there. So for starters, we're going to talk a little bit about where they live in general. So this group, Lagomorph, they're typically very big ears, which their sense of hearing is very important to them. And they are all herbivores, so they all eat plants, usually grass, but occasionally they will nibble on some leaves of some small plants or leaves of bigger bushes, and very, very rarely the leaves of a tree. They'll also chew on some wood and eat the bark from some of those more woody species of plants as well. But they live over a wide range of different kinds of habitats. So the Lagomorph group can be found anywhere from tropical forest to the tundra up at the North Pole, and including the deserts. So they live in a wide variety of different types of ecosystems, but in general, they kind of all have the same body shape, at least with the rabbits, with the hares, and with the pika. in those three differentials, there are some pretty significant differences. One of the things that they share with the rodents, and was why they were classified as the rodents for a long time by scientists, is that they have continuously growing teeth. So if you remember when we talked about beavers, I talked about that, and that's true with most rodent species, that their teeth continue to grow throughout their life, and they actually need to be chewing on like heavy wood to make sure that those teeth stay healthy and sharp. And rabbits would do that as well. So they also have this weird long growing tooth thing going on. The rabbits and the hares, they also typically have very strong hind legs that are very important in helping them move at faster paces. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what's a rabbit and what's a hare. Those words are often used kind of as synonyms or meaning the same thing, but from a scientific standpoint, there's actually some differences. So rabbits tend to be a little bit smaller than the hares do. They usually have shorter ears than the hares do, but they still have big ears. And the big difference is how they start life. So rabbits, when they're born without fur, they're born with their eyes closed, and they're completely helpless as newborns. So they take a while to kind of get up and running, although they do grow very quickly. Also, their gestation, or the pregnancy for the mom rabbit, is typically about 30 days. So really short pregnancy. I know I have a sister-in-law who's pregnant right now. She probably would be much happier if she was a 30-day pregnancy like a rabbit. But they also live in slightly different areas. Rabbits typically live in more forested areas or areas with a lot of brush cover, trees or low-lying bushes, and they also usually dig burrows or holes where they live. And so those are some big things that quantify the rabbits. And those babies, when they're growing, are usually ready to go kind of off on their own and start finding some of their own food within a month. They'll sometimes stay around their mom a little longer, but by a month old, they can find their own food, which is usually the beginning of that process of babies leaving the mom's side. Now the hares, a little bit different. So hares are larger than the rabbits are. They usually have longer ears, so big ears. And when they're born, they're fully developed. They have their eyes open, they have fur all over their body, they can move around within an hour or two of being born. And that really helps them out, especially when they're little guys. If danger comes, they can move around a little bit more. But that also is a little bit because of where they live and where their parents make a home. So with rabbits, they dig a burrow and they live kind of in this underground tunnel system. They're a little more protected from the weather, from predators, from competition. Hares live more in like a grassland or a prairie setting, so there's not as much cover, and they usually just kind of clump some grasses together and make a little nest out of that. And they don't really have as many places to hide, so the babies need to be a little more ready to go when they are born. And because of that, hares' gestation is about 42 days. So the mama hare is pregnant for a bit longer than a mama rabbit is. And like I said, hares are typically a little bit bigger. So to kind of compare those, if you are aware of what a cottontail is a rabbit. It's cute, it's little, it's very, looks similar to like a pet rabbit. And a hare is going to be something more like a jackrabbit. So although it's called a jackrabbit, that is actually a hare. But it's a little longer, it's a little skinnier, it's a little more awkward looking. And it's definitely, jackrabbits are very well adapted to live in a desert environment, and they look that way. So those are a few differences. Now the rabbits you may most be familiar with are the rabbits that people have as pets. And pet rabbits are all from the same ancestor rabbit, and that rabbit is called the European rabbit. And European rabbits are still out in the wild in Europe today, but all domesticated rabbits come from the European rabbit. And over the years, they've created different breeds of rabbits, just like they have with different dogs. So some of the breeds of domesticated rabbits are little, and some of the breeds are huge, and some are in between. But the different breeds are sometimes bred for their color, for their hair quality, for their size. And so all of those have been people manipulating the genetics, and that is how the domesticated rabbits all came to be from the European rabbit. I have a question about, and they're related to jackalopes. Yes, jackalopes, if you've never seen a picture, are really incredible. I encourage you to look at a photo of a jackalope, but I'm also here to tell you scientifically a jackalope is fake. So what a jackalope is usually a rabbit that they put little deer horns or pronghorn horns on, and they make it look like a little horned rabbit, but that's not real. But they are cute, but it's not real. The pygmy rabbits are the smallest of the naturally occurring rabbits, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them in a moment. One thing that's kind of crazy with, or two things that are kind of crazy with the rabbits and the hares. Despite their big long ears, they use those mostly to hear what other animals are doing. So they don't really make much noise to communicate with each other. When they're communicating with each other, they're doing that more through scent, through their sense of smell. So when they go to the bathroom, they leave certain smells in certain areas, and that's how other rabbits in that area know which rabbit's been there or what's going on with that rabbit. So they communicate more through sense of smell and a little bit through body language when they're interacting with each other. Now the other thing, this is really fascinating about rabbits, and this is one of the reasons they got separated out of the rodent group. All rabbits and hares, when they poop, they make two kinds of poops. And we usually don't see the first kind as much. The first kind of poop is more green and it's more soft. And there's a special place inside their digestive tract that's called the cecum, and that is in between their small intestine and their large intestine. And it has very special bacteria in it that help break down the fibers of the plants that they eat, and it also helps produce certain vitamins. So when they poop this first kind of poop, and it's kind of softer and green, it's actually very nutritious, which means they eat it. What? That's kind of crazy, right? So they poop, they chew all their food, they digest it, they poop it, and then they eat that poop and digest it again, and that makes the second kind of poop, which are the poops that we are more familiar with, that are little round black rabbit poops. And so that's kind of similar digestively to how different types of like cows and antelope and other big animals that eat plants, they have 4 stomachs, and so they'll eat it and then they'll kind of cough it back up and chew it again and then swallow it again. So it also is digested in multiple processes. But yeah, the rabbits take it to a whole new level, and that's something I just recently learned. But it seems to work out really well for them because as a group of species, they are wildly successful for the most part. It is definitely a little gross to us. It seems like a little crazy, and it is certainly something that people would not be so willing to do. People do have a similar organ like that between the two intestine tracts, and we usually call that an appendix. And in humans, that kind of has shriveled up and become very small, and we don't really use that at all. And for most medical and scientific purposes, it's in the same place, and it could possibly have one time genetically in the far distant past done a similar thing for us, but our digestion does not require that anymore. And so now we have this like weird little organ that's called the appendix that just kind of sits there and doesn't do anything. But kind of an interesting thing about the rabbits and the hares is there are two kinds of poop. So moving on from that, we're going to talk a little bit about the pika. And if you've never heard of a pika, and if you don't know what a pika looks like, don't be too surprised. A lot of people have never seen or heard of this animal. Despite the fact that there are around 30 different species of pika. I have had the opportunity to see pika while hiking out in nature. Typically in national parks with very high mountains in the western United States is the best place to see or hear the pika. I have seen them in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, and I have seen them up in Yellowstone and in Glacier National Park. So those are the places that I have been around pika and seen them the most. Now, pika are absolutely fascinating animals because they're little. They're just tiny little guys like this. They're usually only about 6 inches long, and they weigh less than half of a pound. So total weight is like 5 to 7 ounces. They're a little bit bigger than like a grapefruit, if you can imagine that, or a softball. And there's 2 species that live in North America, some that live kind of in the western states like Washington and Montana, south down through parts of Oregon, California, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, probably New Mexico, I don't know for sure, I assume, and maybe in Arizona a bit. And then there's another species that lives further north in Canada and Alaska, and those are the 2 North American species. And then there are either 27 or 28, science is still figuring it out, species that live in Asia. And in Asia, I think it's 23 of those species live all in China and nowhere else. So pretty unique animal that pretty much lives in Asia with the 2 species that live here in North America. But one thing I really love about pikas is they are constantly on the go all summer long. As soon as that snow first melts and the grass starts growing in the spring, they are on the go. And what they are doing is they're gathering food. So they will go and clip little grass with their little sharp teeth, and then they'll kind of carry it in their mouth and run it back to their little home. And they usually live in places where there's been rock slides, so lots of really rocky environments, and they'll make a little home, a little space to hide out underneath some of the rocks. And each one kind of has its own little territory that they defend, and there may be hundreds within a particular area where it's really rocky, and then none for miles and miles around until there's more rocks in another area. But they'll gather up all these grasses and little plants, and they'll bring them back to their home, and they'll store them for the next winter. Now these guys, the pika, they usually live at very high altitudes, so winter for them is usually like 4 to 6 to maybe even 7 or 8 months long. So they sometimes have a very short time of time to hunt and harvest their grass and their plants, and a very long time that they need it to keep them full. Because they do not hibernate, they are active all winter long, although they're just under their little rock home and trying to survive in a very cold place by eating this grass and little plants that they've set aside in their thing. So scientists call those haystacks because they make this little like hay pile of dried up grasses and plants. And an interesting thing is that I believe it started with the Native Americans, but it also was passed on to early settlers in the western US, is that they would go up into the rocky slopes and they would find a place where the pika were living, and they would analyze how much grass the pikas were storing. And they would use that as a predictor for how severe the winters would be. For some reason, the pika are kind of aware that if it's going to be a longer winter with lots of cold and lots of snow, the pika haystacks are usually bigger. They somehow know to gather more food to be prepared. One thing I also really love about pika is that they have a vocal communication that they use with each other, and it's really cute, and it's kind of like a high-pitched whistling bark sound, I'm gonna see if I can find a good video that shows what that's like. But they make that sound when they sense danger. And when I've been able to see pika, they kind of view humans as danger, so they will often make that sound when one pika in the community spots a human, or if it's a bird, or if it's a cat, or a snake, they would make that sound, and then all the other pika know that there's danger nearby, and they'll kind of scurry under their little rock homes, and then they'll wait for the danger to pass, which is really very cute to be able to see out in the wild. Now, with all of these animals we've talked about, with the hares, the rabbits, and the pika, about a third of them are considered endangered, with about 8 species of these animals being considered critically endangered. That means there's not very many of them left. And there's a species that is very specific that they've been trying to work with to save, that was called the Columbia pygmy rabbit. And they live in a very isolated valley of Washington state, near the Columbia River, which is the river that flows between Oregon and Washington. And in this valley, this little tiny bunny lives, this little rabbit that's only about this big. They're the smallest kinds of rabbits, and they only weigh about a pound. So that's about the same weight as like a baseball. And they're maybe 8 inches long, so they're just a little bit bigger than the pikas. But they are the smallest rabbit in North America for sure. And this one particular kind only lived in this one valley in Washington state. And with this very special little rabbit, the Department of Fish and Game in Washington state partnered with the Oregon Zoo to create a breeding program to try to save this rabbit. And that was all happening in the early 2000s, so not that long ago. And they found out that genetically there weren't very many Columbia Basin pygmy rabbits left, and a lot of genetic problems had occurred because they were pretty inbred, and so there weren't very many individuals left. And so they tried to figure out what was causing problems, and they realized that, sorry, there's a helicopter. They realized that there was a bit of a problem with some disease that was caused by humans in the area, and also there had been a big wildfire that had wiped out a lot of the grass that they needed to live, and also just the habitat. So a lot of people had moved to the valley and started growing crops there, and that took a lot of the space that the rabbits needed. So this little rabbit became very endangered, and the Oregon Zoo did a lot of really important work to try to save them. And they were down, I believe, to 16 animals at one point when they started their breeding program. So that's very, very few. And during the course of study with genetics, they found out that most of them were related, which meant that there was also high proponent for things to not go very well. And it took a few years to figure out what they needed to get them to breed successfully. And in, I believe it was 2011, they kind of had to give up because it wasn't working well. And that was a pretty sad experience for the people who were working on that. And I don't mean to be sad on a day like today when a lot of people are celebrating different things, but it's also the reality of humankind causing problems for the natural world. And they kind of had to change the way that they were doing their conservation work. And the big thing that they realized is that they needed different genetics to help this species move forward. And so they did genetic testing on another type of rabbit called the Great Basin pygmy rabbit, which is a closely related species. And what they found out is that genetically these two species were very, very close together. And so they actually got some Great Basin pygmy rabbits and tried to breed them with the Columbia Basin pygmy rabbits in efforts to save the species. Now, when they were doing this, they also decided that this species didn't do very well in a captive setting. So at the zoo, it was really difficult to try to get them to successfully breed and survive. So they created a little 6-acre habitat back in the valley where they were from. And they introduced some of the rabbits from the Great Basin pygmy rabbit population. And they hoped that they would crossbreed enough that they would save the species. Now with that, they also kind of said, we need to just back off and see what nature can do. And so we're still in that time of waiting to see what nature can do. I haven't heard what's happened specifically with this species, and that's why the numbers of species are sometimes a little bit confusing and harder to know, because we don't always know what's going on out there in the world. It's a little tough to always tell. But I wanted to take some time to give a special shout out to the Oregon Zoo and for the great work that they did in trying to save the pygmy rabbits in the Columbia Basin. You can read the full story on their website. I may put up a link to it later on today. They are still doing some conservation work in that area, and they are working with other places that are working with other pygmy rabbit species in hopes that they can save those as well. Like I mentioned, about a third of all rabbit species are very endangered, which can be a bit of a problem with a lot of things, because they need clean habitats. They need a place where they can live without being threatened by predators that maybe people introduced, like dogs and cats, or other rabbit species that may be introduced into that area. And that's actually a big problem with rabbits around the world. Rabbits and hares are native to North America, South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. So there's different kinds of rabbits that live in all of those places. Now, some of those places that I didn't mention just now, like Australia, New Zealand, and a lot of different islands around the world, didn't have rabbits. But unfortunately, rabbits got introduced to a lot of those places because of people. And specifically in Australia, the rabbit that got introduced there is the European rabbit, which is also the ancestor to domestic rabbits. And that was in the mid-1850s. So quite a while ago, almost, 170 years ago. And they actually caused a lot of problem in Australia. They helped cause the extinction of several other animals that lived there that kind of functioned in a rabbit-like way, but didn't reproduce as quickly as a rabbit could. And so they outcompeted those animals for food, and those other animals became extinct, some of which barely were even known by scientists at that time. Australia still has a problem with rabbits, as does New Zealand. They're not native there, and they eat a lot of plants that other animals need to survive. And so that's kind of an ongoing struggle there, as well as in several island groups around the world. And that's a problem with humans, is that sometimes when we go to a place and we're like, oh, there's no rabbits here, or there's no turtles here, or there's no cats or dogs here, let's bring those things with us. And then it gets to be a big problem. And sometimes those animals don't have a predator in that area, and they overpopulate and cause big problems for the whole ecosystem. It's really all about balance. Keeping things in the balance that nature previously had going on. And if we remove a piece of a puzzle or add pieces of a puzzle from somewhere else, it can throw that whole balance off. And that's what is the story with most rabbit species today. In places they're overpopulated, in places they're have been introduced and are outcompeting the species that should be there. So again, people messing up things with rabbits around the world. So I'll be putting up some really great things about rabbits and little ways that you can kind of tell the difference, and some great differences between rabbits. One thing I find really fascinating about rabbits in general is that rabbits that live in very hot areas have really big ears, not always, but mostly, and their ears are very thin, and that helps them to cool down in a hot environment. Whereas rabbits that live in the snowy areas of like near the North Pole, the Arctic hare, has very short ears that are just little tiny guys, and they're very thick. They're very dense ears, and that would help keep that kind of animal a lot warmer. So they're uniquely adapted to live in the spaces that they live, and they're a great species to learn about and celebrate for that reason. And I also got to talk a little bit about pikas today. I love pikas. I'll be putting up a video of pikas later on the Facebook. So I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today, and I hope you're staying safe, being happy, and taking care of yourself. So until tomorrow, have a good one. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, and follow on any of the Zoo Nerd accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks. Bye.